This is one of the most chilling, heartbreaking, and unforgettable stories you will ever hear. A beloved choir teacher, Blair, was brutally murdered in her own home, and just days later, an elderly couple was found dead in almost the exact same way. At first, it looked like a simple robbery, but what investigators uncovered was far more terrifying. This is the most shocking, tragic, and compelling case you will ever watch, and I promise, once you hear it, you won't be able to forget it. Blair was born on May 31st, 1961, in California. She grew up in a warm, supportive family with her parents, a brother, and a sister. From a young age, she was drawn to the arts, but music was where her heart truly belonged. Singing wasn't just a pastime, it was her calling. When the time came to choose a career, there was never any doubt. Kathy enrolled at the University of Texas, majoring in vocal performance, and moved to Austin to pursue her dream. After graduating, she built a life around her passion. She became a beloved music teacher and led a Christian choir, inspiring generations of students with her talent and boundless enthusiasm. Her personal life, however, was more complicated. She married twice, but both marriages ended in divorce. Through it all, Kathy remained dedicated to raising her two children, a son and a daughter, on her own. By 2013, Kathy was 52 and had just moved into what she considered her dream home, a cozy house in a quiet, safe Austin suburb. Her children were grown and living independently, while she continued teaching and conducting her choir. Life felt stable and fulfilling. In December 2014, her son Joe, then 23 and serving in the military, came home to spend time with her before his next deployment. Kathy was thrilled to have him close again. On the evening of December 5th, Joe went out with friends, not returning until nearly noon the next day. As he walked inside, he called out for his mother. Silence answered him. Uneasy, he checked room by room until he opened the door to her bedroom. The scene was every son's worst nightmare. Kathy lay lifeless on the floor beside her bed, her body surrounded by blood. Joe instantly knew she was gone. Shocked and panicked, he ran outside and called the police. Investigators arrived quickly and confirmed that Kathy had been dead for several hours. From the volume of blood alone, it was obvious this was no accident. It was murder. While medical examiners examined the body, officers combed through the crime scene. In the bedroom, drawers from a jewelry box had been pulled out and scattered across the floor. Some of Kathy's jewelry was missing, leading police to suspect robbery as the motive. But something about that theory didn't sit right. The intruder hadn't taken anything else of value. Her laptop, phone, and other electronics were untouched, sitting in plain view. The house wasn't ransacked. The only thing disturbed was the jewelry box. And then there was the timing. Most burglaries occur during the day, when homes are empty, not at night, in one of the safest neighborhoods in Austin. That alone raised doubts about the robbery theory. Bloodstains offered another disturbing clue. They were found not just on the floor, but also on the jewelry box itself, suggesting Kathy had been attacked first, before the so-called theft even began. It appeared the killer had entered her bedroom, murdered her almost immediately, and only afterward searched through her things. Investigators also noted there was no forced entry at the front door. The back door, however, had been left unlocked. Joe explained that his mother often left it that way, a detail that made detectives pause. If the killer had slipped in through that door, had they known in advance it would be open? Forensic teams scoured the house but came up empty. No fingerprints, no usable DNA. The only clue left behind was a partial shoe print in Kathy's blood on the bedroom floor. The autopsy painted an even clearer picture of the brutality. Kathy had suffered multiple stab wounds and signs of strangulation. There was no evidence of sexual assault, reinforcing what detectives were beginning to suspect. This wasn't a random break-in. It was personal. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. With no physical evidence to guide them, detectives turned their attention to Kathy's inner circle, starting where most homicide investigations begin: the family. Her son Joe, who had discovered the body, was the natural first suspect. He had opportunity, and in cases like this, investigators know the killer is often someone close. But Joe's alibi quickly cleared him. Friends confirmed he had spent the entire night out, and his timeline checked out perfectly. Detectives moved on. They spoke with Kathy's colleagues, her choir members, her closest friends, anyone who might know of a grudge or hidden conflict. But everyone told the same story. Kathy had no enemies. She lived for her students and her music. She was warm, kind, and deeply loved. No one could imagine who would want to harm her. Just as the trail began to cool, a name surfaced. Several friends mentioned that Kathy often spoke about her second ex-husband, a man she had divorced 4 years earlier. Their split had been messy. He wouldn't leave her alone, continued showing up uninvited, and according to Kathy, simply refused to let go. She even confided to friends that she feared for her safety and begged them not to reveal her new address. Detectives tracked him down in a nearby town, and his response to the news of Kathy's death was unsettling. The first words out of his mouth were, "Was she shot?" The detail jarred detectives. No one had mentioned how Kathy was killed. Why would his mind go there first? He claimed he'd been away in his RV on a solo getaway. He even allowed police to search it without a warrant. But inside, they found nothing incriminating, no weapon, no blood, nothing tying him to the crime. Suspicion lingered, but without evidence, they had to let him go. Days later, an unexpected tip shifted the investigation. A friend of Kathy's called to report something bizarre that had happened at her memorial service. A man no one recognized had stood up to deliver a speech. From the moment he began speaking, guests felt uneasy. His words were odd, his mannerisms strange, and his stories about Kathy didn't line up with the woman they knew. None of Kathy's closest friends had ever seen him before. Detectives dug in. One friend eventually placed him, a sales clerk from a local women's clothing store. When police questioned him, he admitted he had never met Kathy. He had read about her murder in the newspaper, felt moved, and decided to attend her memorial. His behavior was unnerving, but there was no evidence to connect him to the murder. The case stalled again. Then a break came from an unexpected source. A local man named Rob called police with something unusual. A hunting enthusiast, he had recently purchased a thermal imaging scope for his rifle. In the early morning hours of December 6th, just hours after Kathy's murder, he had taken the scope out for a test run, wandering near a wooded stretch at the edge of his neighborhood. Through the scope, he watched as a car slowed beside him, pulled over, and parked. Moments later, a man stepped out, walking down a side street into the darkness. At the time, Rob dismissed it as nothing out of the ordinary. But when news broke of Kathy's murder, the memory came rushing back. The man had been heading in the direction of her home. And then Rob remembered something crucial. His thermal scope had been recording the entire time. He reviewed the footage, and there it was, clear as day. A man stepping from his car and disappearing into the night. Detectives were fascinated by the footage, but there was a glaring problem. The rifle scope had captured everything in thermal imaging, meaning the video showed only a ghostly silhouette of the suspect. It revealed almost no facial features, no identifying details, just an outline. Even so, the recording offered valuable clues. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and his gait was distinctive. Most importantly, the thermal lens had picked up his car. Investigators hoped they could at least narrow down potential makes and models from the shape and size of the vehicle. They immediately compared the suspect's silhouette and car to their two main persons of interest: Kathy's ex-husband and the strange man who had surfaced at her memorial. But neither man fit. The body shape didn't match, and neither owned a car resembling the one in the video. With that, both leads effectively collapsed, leaving detectives back where they had started. For several days, investigators pored over the recording, replaying it again and again, extracting every possible detail. Yet no breakthrough came. The investigation hit another standstill, the kind that weighs heavily in homicide cases. Then, on December 15th, everything changed. That morning, a caretaker went to check on an elderly couple, Billy and Sydney Shelton. As she approached their Austin home, she immediately sensed something was wrong. The front door hung open, and the lock bore signs of forced entry. Inside, the scene was brutal. In the bedroom, the couple lay lifeless in a pool of blood. Horrified, she dialed police at once. Medical examiners later confirmed the grim details. Both Billy and Sydney had been stabbed repeatedly, and detectives spotted something chillingly familiar. Their jewelry box drawers had been pulled out and rifled through, the contents stolen. But once again, as with Kathy's case, everything else of value, electronics, cash, personal items, remained untouched. The parallels were unmistakable. Both homes were just 15 minutes apart. Both attacks occurred at night, targeting victims as they slept. And in both cases, the killer had ignored everything except the jewelry box. Initially, detectives had believed Kathy's murder might have been personal, an act of rage committed by someone close to her. But the Shelton crime forced them to reconsider. The brutality, the eerie consistency, the staging, it all suggested something else entirely. If Kathy and the Sheltons had no connection, then the motive wasn't personal. It was something broader, colder, more terrifying. This wasn't about revenge. It was about selection. The realization sank in with chilling clarity. They were no longer investigating a single homicide. They were dealing with a predator who had struck twice. A serial killer was on the loose. And unless they stopped him, he would almost certainly kill again. With two brutal murders on their hands, detectives went back to the basics, re-interviewing everyone connected to the victims. They urged friends, family, and neighbors to share anything, no matter how small, hoping that a stray memory might crack the case. And finally, a sliver of information surfaced. One of Kathy's friends recalled a troubling conversation from months earlier. Kathy had complained about a handyman sent by her landlord to do repairs on her house. The work had been sloppy, but that wasn't what disturbed her most. It was the man himself. Something about his demeanor had unsettled her. Detectives tracked down the landlord, who provided the handyman's name and contact details: Timothy Parlins, a local resident. When they began digging into Parlins, red flags appeared immediately. His brother was active at the same church attended by Billy and Sydney Shelton, and Timothy himself had been spotted there. More troubling still was his criminal record. He had a long history of arrests, mostly for theft, and his favorite target was jewelry. At the time of the murders, Timothy was out on parole and living in a long-stay hotel. Detectives went to question him. Parlins agreed to talk, but when they asked to come up to his room, he flatly refused, insisting they speak outside in the parking lot. He seemed guarded, even evasive. At first, he claimed not to remember Kathy at all, but when pressed with details, he backtracked, admitting he had done some repair work at her home. Still, he denied any involvement in her murder. He even offered an alibi. He said he'd been working an overnight shift at a convenience store the night Kathy was killed. Yet something didn't add up. Timothy's build didn't match the tall, broad silhouette captured on thermal video. He was shorter, stockier, and his car looked nothing like the one caught on tape. With nothing concrete tying him to the crime, detectives had no choice but to let him go. But when they checked his alibi, the story unraveled. Timothy hadn't been at work that night because he no longer had a job. His employer revealed he'd been fired a week before Kathy's murder. His so-called alibi was a complete fabrication. Alarmed, investigators rushed back to the hotel. By then, Timothy was gone. His wife, however, allowed them inside the room. What they found changed everything. Among his belongings was a pawn shop receipt, dated the very day Kathy was murdered. On it was a list of jewelry items he had sold. Detectives wasted no time tracking down the shop, where they quickly confirmed the pieces had belonged to Kathy, and the evidence didn't stop there. Surveillance footage from the pawn shop parking lot revealed that Timothy hadn't driven his own car that day. He had arrived in a different vehicle. A quick check of the plates revealed it belonged to his sister, and that detail proved crucial. Her car closely matched the one seen on Rob's thermal scope the night of Kathy's murder. Armed with this connection, detectives secured a search warrant for the vehicle. Forensic teams combed through it and uncovered damning evidence, traces of blood on the front seat and floorboards. Laboratory tests confirmed what investigators already feared. It was Kathy's blood. That was the final piece they needed. Detectives moved swiftly, arresting Timothy Parlins and hauling him in for questioning. Even when confronted with the mountain of evidence, Timothy refused to waver. Sitting in the interrogation room, he repeated the same phrase like a mantra. "These hands have never killed anyone." Detectives pressed him for hours, laying out every piece of damning proof: the pawn shop receipt, the jewelry, the blood in the car. Finally, Timothy cracked, but not in the way anyone expected. He didn't confess. Instead, he pointed the finger elsewhere. The real killer, he claimed, was a man named Sean. To detectives, it sounded like a desperate attempt to shift blame. The evidence against Timothy was strong, and suddenly naming an accomplice seemed like a ploy to muddy the waters. Still, investigators had to be thorough. If Sean existed, they needed to know. They soon tracked him down. Sean Gant Benacasser, 30, was a former science teacher with a degree in microbiology. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, and lived several hundred miles from Austin. At first glance, nothing about him suggested murderer. But when detectives questioned him, the story took a strange turn. Sean admitted he had met Timothy a few months earlier and thought him shady. Then came the bombshell. He had actually been in Austin on the nights of both murders. And, he added, he had stayed at Timothy's place during that time. The contradictions began almost immediately. At first, Sean said that on the night Kathy was killed, Timothy had left the house without explanation. Minutes later, he changed his account. The two of them had driven to Kathy's home together. According to Sean's revised story, Timothy got out of the car while he waited. When Timothy returned, he was carrying a bag stained with blood. Later, Sean peeked inside and saw jewelry. Only then, he said, did he realize something terrible had happened. He insisted he hadn't known Timothy's plans and never agreed to be part of a crime. But detectives weren't convinced. During questioning, Sean asked to use the restroom. As he walked away, one investigator watched closely. His stride, his posture, the rhythm of his steps, it all looked eerily familiar. It matched the silhouette captured on Rob's thermal camera the night Kathy was murdered. That observation changed everything. For the first time, detectives began to wonder if Sean wasn't just a witness or a reluctant accomplice, but the killer himself. The problem was, unlike with Timothy, they had no physical evidence tying him to the crime. Suspicion wasn't enough to build a case. When Sean returned, investigators tried a new tactic. They challenged his account directly, suggesting he hadn't simply sat in the car. What if Timothy had forced him to go into the house, they asked, coercing him, threatening him. The gambit worked. Sean faltered, then admitted the truth. He hadn't waited in the car. He had gone into the house, alone. Sean's first account was simple. He claimed he had gone into the house only to steal. Timothy, he said, stayed outside while he slipped through the unlocked back door, searching room to room for valuables. When he reached Kathy's bedroom, he found the jewelry box sitting out, and Kathy still asleep in bed. According to his story, he quietly took the valuables and left, never laying a hand on her. To explain the murder, he suggested that Timothy must have returned afterward, killing Kathy for reasons he couldn't explain. Detectives didn't buy it. The evidence told a different story. Blood had been found on the jewelry box, meaning the theft occurred only after Kathy was killed. That detail alone tore apart Sean's version. Piece by piece, investigators dismantled his lies until he finally broke. This time, he admitted what really happened. As soon as he entered the bedroom, Kathy woke up and startled him. In a panic, he pulled a knife and stabbed her again and again. Once she was dead, he grabbed the jewelry and fled. Even then, detectives doubted parts of his account. It seemed unlikely that Kathy had suddenly lunged at him, trying to seize his weapon. Still, the confession was enough to secure his arrest. Forensic testing cemented the case. Investigators took Sean's shoes and compared the soles to the bloody footprint left at the crime scene. It was an exact match. But another pressing question remained. What about the elderly couple, Billy and Sydney Shelton? When detectives confronted Sean with that crime, his demeanor shifted instantly. He stopped talking, demanded a lawyer, and refused to answer another word. With no direct evidence tying him to their murders, the case hit a wall. That left Timothy. Detectives charged him as an accomplice. Under Texas law, that meant he could face the same penalties as Sean, even if he hadn't wielded the knife himself. Timothy admitted to driving Sean to Kathy's house, but insisted he never left the car and had no idea his partner planned to kill her. Still, he confessed to pawning Kathy's jewelry, which put him squarely in the conspiracy. When pressed about the Shelton murders, Timothy admitted he and Sean had targeted the couple's home too. Once again, he claimed he remained in the car while Sean went inside alone. Investigators couldn't ignore the pattern. The thermal video from Kathy's case showed only one man leaving the vehicle. If the same sequence repeated itself with the Sheltons, it suggested Sean had carried out both killings himself, while Timothy acted as driver and fence for the stolen goods. In the end, prosecutors charged Timothy in all 3 murders for his role in the crimes, even if he hadn't physically struck the blows. Sean was formally charged with Kathy Blair's murder, but his connection to the Shelton killings remained unproven, at least for the time being. The court decided that Timothy Parlins and Sean Gant Benacasser would stand trial separately. Timothy went first. Throughout the proceedings, he insisted he hadn't killed anyone and claimed he had no idea Sean planned on doing so. But the facts told a different story. Timothy had driven Sean to both crime scenes and later pawned Kathy's stolen jewelry. That was enough for the jury. They convicted him of murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sean's trial was far more contentious. Unlike Timothy, who was directly tied to the crime through physical evidence, the case against Sean relied largely on his confession, the bloody shoe print in Kathy's bedroom, and the thermal camera footage. His defense attorney launched an aggressive counterattack, arguing that detectives had coerced Sean into confessing and pressured him into taking the blame for murders he didn't commit. The rest of the case, he claimed, was circumstantial. The jury was divided. Unable to reach a unanimous verdict, the judge declared a mistrial, but prosecutors refused to let the case collapse. A few months later, they brought Sean back to court for a second trial. This time, the jury was convinced. Sean was found guilty of Kathy Blair's murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Still, despite investigators' strong suspicions, he was never charged with the double homicide of Billy and Sidney Shelton. Detectives were certain he was responsible, but without direct evidence, the charges wouldn't stick. Even with both men behind bars, unanswered questions lingered. Why had Sean killed at all? If Kathy really had startled him when she woke up, he could have fled into the night. It was dark. She would never have identified him. Instead, he chose to stab her repeatedly. Detectives could never fully explain the decision, other than to conclude he had a capacity for violence that may not have required motive. As for Timothy, investigators believed his role in targeting Kathy might have been personal. Months earlier, she had complained to her landlord about his shoddy repair work, a complaint that cost him money. Detectives theorized that resentment may have festered, eventually making her a convenient target when he and Sean planned the burglary. Whether that grudge was the real reason, no one could say for certain. The motive behind the Shelton murders was even murkier. Perhaps Timothy had encountered them at church, and some unspoken conflict brewed. Or perhaps Sean killed simply because he wanted to. Investigators could never be sure. One fact, however, stood out above the rest. Without a neighbor's chance decision to test out his new thermal imaging rifle scope in the early hours of December 6th, the case might never have been solved. That recording, the grainy outline of a man stepping from his car, was ultimately the piece of evidence that secured Sean's conviction. Without it, prosecutors admitted, the case against him might have unraveled, and Sean might have walked free. What began as what looked like a burglary had spiraled into senseless, cold-blooded murder. And if not for luck, vigilance, and persistence, the killer might still be out there. Share your thoughts on this story in the comment section. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.